Can I remind you that the meeting is being recorded and the recording will be made available on the Comhairle's website following the meeting. Item number 1 on today's agenda is the approval of the minute of the meeting of the 26th of June earlier this year. Members happy with that? Yep. Item number 2 is declaration of interest. Members are asked to declare any interest they may have in any items in the agenda. It would be helpful if members explained why they are declaring interest in the item concerned. Any declarations of interest from members of the board? No. Thank you. Regarding procedure, any motion or amendment in relation to a planning application must be based solely on planning reasons. If a member moves an amendment, the chair will invite him or her to clearly articulate the amendment and the planning reasons upon which it is based. Thereafter, the chair may at his discretion continue the business of the meeting in accordance with the time-out protocol. The planning manager or the development management team will present the recommendations of officers. In the event of a member seeking to move an amendment, the chair may call upon the legal advisor or planning advisor to provide advice to the board. Thank you for that. Item number 3 on today's agenda is planning permission in principle to erect house, create access, install private drainage system at number 10 Neep, Uig, Isle of Lewis. This application is considered by the appointed officer to raise sensitive issues and it is therefore presented to the board for a decision. An addendum to the report was circulated to members yesterday at item 3A on SharePoint, following a late submission from the applicant. The applicant has also provided supporting photographs pertaining to the application. Hard copies are available to members in the chamber via Helen MacDonald. So can I now invite Morag Ferguson to speak to the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. As Chair has said, this is a planning application in principle for the erection of a house on a croft at 10 Neep in Uig. I'll take you through the first few slides fairly quickly. These are just to do with the location. So for those less familiar, the site's on the Baltus Peninsula in the north and the west of Lewis. The slide just shows the extent of the croft in slightly more context. And again, just another one showing the extent of the croft and the blue arrow indicative of the location of the proposed site within the croft. The actual site itself is on croft land out with the settlement in terms of our Comhairle settlement strategy. It's southeast of the settlement of Neep and it's opposite Reef Beach, Thrainaberry Beach. The site is on undeveloped Comhairle land. Thrainaberry is the only special area, it's the only Comhairle that's designated a special area of conservation in Lewis. Surrounding ground, it's largely grazing. There's parcels of croft land that have been fenced off. There's also some Comhairle common grazing between the public road and the beach. And this area also has consent as a seasonal caravan site. In terms of development strategy of the local development plan, the site's located out with settlement. Just by way of background, planning permission for a near identical proposal was considered by the planning board in May 23. At the time, it was also confirmed in respect of that application that further information would be required, but it was not requested on account of the principle being put forward for refusal. And it's a similar situation this time. We haven't asked for this additional information because the recommendation remains the same. So there's just really a comparison for the benefit of members to do the planning history. So the slide on the left is the current application which shows an access coming in off the Coast Road, and the former application, which was refused in 2023, the actual housing site is the same, but the access was coming in from a slightly different position. Then there's just a couple of aerials really just that replicate the Ordnance Survey maps. This is just an aerial just showing the location of the site within the wider context. You can see the kind of extent of the Maghair area, which is in green there. The road runs fairly close to the coast. The campsite is on the shore side. So you can see it slightly better here. That's the location of the site. And on the headland going into shore, you can see the caravan site facilities block and the location of the caravan site itself. Now take you to the actual application site. So the house site itself is just about 1/4 of an acre. It's 0.1 hectare. It's about 0.07 hectares for the track. The nearest residential properties are in the main village of Neep, and the site is separated from them by raised landform. It's about 1/2 kilometre further along the road. The topography of the site itself, it's uneven. It's a raised sloping knoll, and the house would be built on the back of that. There's a drop in level across the axis, and the ground cover is, Maghair grassland. Round about the area, there's quite a lot of low-lying waterlogged areas, and rocky moorland to the southwest, where the land rises quite steeply. So as I said at the start, the planning permission is an application in principle. It's for the erection of a dwelling house, creation of the access, and to provide a drainage system. And on account of it being a planning permission in principle, it's supported by minimal information. As I mentioned at the start, the Tranberry Maghair is a special area of conservation, so it's designated under what was formerly European legislation, which has been taken over into UK legislation post-Brexit. And you can see the campsite is indicated just by the caravan and the pointer works. All right, okay. And the site is just to the left, top left of the drawing. So you can see here the relationship between the access into the caravan site building, and the proposed house site. It's just a slightly better detail where a proposed house might be sited and where the private drainage system would be in the corner where the land starts to fall away towards the back. These are just like a series of photographs then. This is a view taken from the south of Neep village, heading towards the caravan site, and the site would be on that kind of raised area indicated by the red arrow. Similar image, you can see the caravan site facilities building in the distance there. This is a view showing the Maghair and the caravan site taken from the south. And you can see the raised moorland towards the back. So there's a bit of Maghair plain on both sides of the public road, and then it moves into fairly steep ground. So this is just, you can see the access into the caravan site on the left there, and the access towards the house site is indicated by the red arrow there. You can see the nature of the ground. It's really typical Maghair habitat. And then this is like you're facing towards Neep village. So over the rise there are where the main houses are. And you can see the kind of raised grassy knoll on the house would be on the kind of just back slope of that. And this is just further kind of image indicating the site and the access route, which would come towards the public road. You can see behind the site the kind of reeds, that's a kind of low marshy area, and then the land rises onto the rocky moorland. So, key planning issues. The application site for a house was refused the grant of planning permission in 2023, and that is a material consideration that carries significant weight in the current determination. It still remains the case that in terms of the Comhairle development strategy, the site is out with settlement. The development strategy is what sets out guides where development should and should not be located, and it also sets out the principles behind that. Sites on a Comhairle SAC, it's acknowledged that there is a campsite there, and that is causing some harm to the quality of the Comhairle there. Both sites remote from the residential housing. It's assessed that there would be some harm to the landscape character, and also concerned that it would set an undesirable precedent for future development. And just in terms of procedure, if the committee were minded to take a different view to the recommendation, then we would advise that certain information would be required in order to complete the planning assessment. And these are the kind of items that are listed there. And ideally, given the location, you would want to see the house design. Just for the benefit, before we further, the context to the development strategy is set out in this slide. So for out with settlement areas, I'll just let members read that. So that's the context to the policy. And then the actual policy itself is worded as follows. Take members back to the site. So, as the chair advised at the start of the meeting, additional commentary was submitted by the applicant. These comments were assessed, and the submission was uploaded to the portal under cover of an addendum report. If any member has not had sight of the submission, then there are paper copies available. It's our assessment that the matters raised do not alter the recommendation. The recommendation is for refusal. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Morag, for that report. I wonder at this juncture, can I ask Helen, can you distribute the hard copies of the photographs? Oh, the only one, okay. For the benefit of members of the board who are joining the meeting online, we're just going to scan these images to you by email in the next few minutes. I apologise if I have them already. Very good. Before we enter formal deliberations, I'm ruling the addition of the addendum at 3A as urgent. So can I now open this to members of the board for any questions or comments, please? Councillor McNeill.
Thank you, Chair. Having seen this for the second time, and having read the reports and all the photos and all the various evidence, I find it kind of strange that a crofter has been refused to build a house on his croft when in front of his croft there's dozens of camper vans and caravans and stuff. I understand where planning's coming from, but personally, I would like to have a site visit to this site if possible, so we can visualise for ourselves, because what's been put forward on paper here is, you know, I think a picture and actually a site visit will give us a lot more information that's proven worthy in the past when we've had similar planning in front of us. So.
Thank you, Councillor McNeill. Any other comments or suggestions from members? Councillor Finlay-Stewart.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I agree with Councillor McNeill. It's okay looking at photos, but I think it's far easier if you're actually there to see that. But I've got another couple of questions. You know, I can't remember where it is on the paper here, but it says that if the planning was consented, that there will be additional surveys, outer surveys, and topographic surveys. Would the applicant be, you know, sort of liable for the cost of all these surveys? And also going forward, there's also that the place has to be kept. I can't remember how it's worded, to make sure that there's no sort of disruption to the outers and that at the time that the place is getting built. So who actually bears the cost of all these surveys and all this extra work that needs to be done to build this?
Mrs. Ferguson.
That's the responsibility of the applicant, and given the recommendation for refusal, we have not requested that information because it would not be appropriate to put somebody to the expense of carrying out that work if the principle of development is considered to be unacceptable. If, as I said, if the Comhairle was minded to take a different view to the recommendation, then it wouldn't be competent for us to determine the report, to determine the case. It would need to come back before you with the applicant having provided that information for assessment.
Okay. Happy with that, Councillor Stewart? Any other questions or comments? Well, so far there appears to be a consensus by members who have spoken already for us to have a site visit. And I am amenable to that opinion. Are members content that we pursue the option of a site visit? Yep. Unanimous. Very good. Therefore, we'll suspend further deliberations on this item and We'll arrange a site visit at a date and time convenient to us all. The clerk of the board, Mr. Mackay, you will liaise with members. Hopefully get in touch with us in the next week or so and take matters from there forthwith. Yes. Very good. So I'll suspend item 3 on today's agenda for further deliberation at a future date following the site visit. Moving on to item 4. Item 4 on today's agenda is planning permission in principle to erect single bedroom properties within buildings and create associated access and parking at Sunnyhill, Tarbert, Isle of Harris. This application has been a subject to more than 6 representations and therefore, in accordance with the scheme of delegation, has been referred to the board for a decision. Can I now invite Morag Ferguson to speak to this report?
Thank you, Chair. It's a planning application to erect single bedroom properties, but they would be within 2 or 3 buildings in order to reflect the kind of scale of a kind of large domestic dwelling house. It's a planning permission in principle, and therefore there's very limited information at this stage. The houses would also require their associated access and parking, and the site is at Sunnyhill and Tarbert. So just to give members some context, it's the village of Tarbert. You can see the pier on the marshalling area down in the bottom left of the slide. The road going out is towards the Scalpe. You can see the council's Urga Roads Depot on the top right, and immediately to the right of the arrow there is a small social housing development, Sunnyhill. It's 12 small houses, and the application site would be to the northwest of that. It's just like an image that just kind of shows it in a little bit more detail. So in the top right slide, outlined in red there, is the extent of the application site. To the right of it is the existing social housing development of Sunnyhill. Across the road from Sunnyhill there is a building that was built by HIE as an office, and it's now used by the Isle of Harris Candles company. The care home, the Harris House care home, is in the just inside the top left quadrant, and again you can see just the pier while it was under work in the bottom right. So there are some existing residential houses round about. You can see, like in the bottom quadrant there, a number of different houses. As I said, the application's in principle, and again there's been very limited information submitted with it. You see the access road coming in beside the housing at Sunnyhill. It would climb up the slope. The site itself is not right beside the road, it's set back from the road. All the surrounding land is owned by North Harris Estate. Just a bit of context. So the location, it's undeveloped land. It's rough grazing over bedrock. The application site is 0.32 of a hectare, so that's about just over 3/4 of an acre. And it's on the northeasterly edge of Tarbert as you leave to travel out to Scalpe. All the surrounding ground is pretty much Louisian gneiss bedrock. Shallow pockets of peat and soil. Vegetation cover is rank grass heather. In common with the rest of Harris, the site is within the South Lewis Harris and North Uist National Scenic Area. And just in terms of the Comhairle's development strategy, development plan, this is mapped as a main, Tarbert itself is mapped as a main settlement. It's one of our main settlements in the Outer Hebrides. And the site straddles the boundary. It's largely inside the boundary, but a small area to the rear of the site would be out with the settlement boundary. In terms of planning history, this site has had planning permission on 2 previous occasions, both times for single houses. First of all in 2007, then again as a detailed application for a house in 2017, and neither of these applications was ever implemented. This now just look a few images. So the access into the proposed site would be via the access that currently is at the gable end of the houses at Sunny Hill, just indicated by the orange arrow. And the access would, as I said, the site is not immediately beside the road. It's kind of set back behind the first row of houses at Sunny Hill. So the access would climb up, go along the gable and just climb up to the higher level. This is the front of the site. So as I said, like you go up towards the kind of corner of the sheep bank and you're looking across the site, and that's you facing northwest. So just brief slide again, just to kind of come back. We're looking at a planning permission for single bedroom properties to be erected within 2 to 3 buildings and the access and parking. And again, like just that there's fairly limited information available. So this is a view from the road looking over the site facing northwest. You can see like the concrete area. So the site begins roughly where that concrete block area is in the top right quadrant. It's not immediately beside the road. And again, that's a view again from the roadside facing northeast. You can see Sunny Hill, and the start of the site would be in line pretty much with the back gable, with the row of houses where you can see the furthest back gable. The slide just shows the footway which runs from Sunny Hill into the village of Tarbert along the side of the main road. This is an image taken at the top of the site, so looking back down over the site. As you can see, like the houses at Sunny Hill there, and the sheep bank in the foreground, and you're looking out over East Loch Tarbert. And then this is another view just looking across the top of the site, so it's a kind of bit of a kind of rocky plateau up the top, but you can see there the kind of shelves of bedrock. There were 11 representations received in respect to the application, and the issues that were raised in representation related to road safety, also to do with siting, means of construction and amenity, and then some other kind of general comments. So I'll just let members kind of remind themselves of these. Now, these issues have all been addressed within the planning report. So, key planning issues. The Comhairle under the housing strategy carries out a housing needs and demand assessment, and there's a demonstrable need for housing in Tarbert and in Harris more generally. it's extremely challenging to identify suitable land in the Tarbert area and indeed in the wider kind of Harris area due to topography, ground conditions and the availability of land. It has to be acknowledged that there's going to be challenges around development viability here, given the geology and the ground conditions, which are very challenging. However, from a planning perspective, the development of the site would not compromise the settlement pattern of Tarbert, or indeed the surrounding rural area. And subject to planning controls, a development should not significantly harm the neighbouring residential amenity. There are a number of conditions set out in the recommendation to control matters both during construction and post-development. It's also the case that there is an existing roadside footway from the site into the village, and also that because it's within the settlement boundary, it can be served by an existing public sewer. Again, it's acknowledged it's a planning permission in principle. There are minimal details. It basically provides the site boundary and the means of access, which is the minimum you're required to provide for a planning permission in principle. If members were minded to approve the application in line with the recommendation, then the applicants would be required to bring forward a further application for the matter specified by condition, and this would cover in more detail the access arrangements, road safety considerations, off-street parking, the building appearance, their scale and design, any impacts on the wider kind of landscape and the village. They would also need to be able to demonstrate their methodology for clearing and platforming the site to make it suitable for building and also neighbour amenity. The recommendation is for approval. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Morag, for that report. Any questions or comments from members of the board?
Yeah, Chair. Just
Vice Chair.
Hi there. As you've alluded to in your report, I think this is a much needed development in Harris. A lot of problems with businesses finding accommodation for staff. As we see with the distillery, a lot of the people have to stay in Stornoway, and the hotel trade is also affected by this, by not being able to get people to come and stay in the area because there's no accommodation. I think I'm minded to accept this and go with the recommendation.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Can I bring in Councillor Finnegan online?
Yeah.
Now?
All right. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, it was just to make the committee aware that of a change since the application went in. Initially, that Crofters had supported the proposal, but now they've withdrawn support for the. I don't know how material relevant it is, but they've withdrawn support for the land, and as a consequence of that, North Harris Trust have decided not to support the project in that area. So I don't know again if that's relevant or not relevant to this application, because it's in principle, but I just thought it was important that the committee knew about it.
Thank you for that, Councillor Finnegan. Mrs. Ferguson, is that a material planning consideration for the board?
The land ownership issue is not a material planning consideration. Planning is independent of the land tenure arrangements. In relation to the applicant in this case is the North Harris Community Council, and the views of the North Harris Trust, they act as agent, but it's only the Community Council as the applicant that can make a decision on whether to maintain their application or remove it.
Thank you for that. Are you happy with that, Councillor Finnegan?
Yeah, thanks for the reply. Yeah, and that's fair enough. You know, that's. I just wanted to make everyone aware of the situation. It's the same for the next one as well. The one that's the next item as well. But anyway, I just want to make that aware.
Thank you for that. Councillor Macaulay.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. I'm minded to approve this as well, but I take on what the Vice Chair said about accommodation in Tarbert being needed, but I assume I'm right in saying that we don't know that's what's going to be happening. There could be holiday lets, it could be anything, I assume, and just not that should make any difference to us anyways, but I don't, am I right in saying that would be the case? But I'm still minded to go with your approval.
Yeah, the application is in principle, and like any planning permission, it pertains to the land, and the land can transfer in ownership. And as you can see for this particular site, there have been 2 previous applications by different parties, which weren't implemented. It's also the case that, you know, the land could transfer again. So the planning permission is particular to the land, and what you're granting planning permission for is for effectively single bedroom units, if you like, but they would be within 2 to 3 buildings. So they would be like possibly terraces, possibly flats, but it is the case that planning permission pertains to the land and is tradable.
Happy with that, Ian? Very good. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Morag, for the presentation. I'm just like the Vice Chair, I'm minded to support this. I think we've heard a lot over the last 2 or 3 years about the desperate shortage of accommodation in that general area, and to me it looks like a good use of something that's not doing very much now, the land. So I would be happy to support this. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor MacLeod. Therefore, the recommendation before us is that the planning application in principle be approved. Do members of the board agree? Thank you. Moving on to item number 5 on this morning's agenda. This is planning permission in principle to erect single bedroom properties within buildings and create associated access and parking at East Tarbert, Isle of Harris. This application has been subject to more than 6 representations, and therefore in accordance with the scheme of delegation has been referred to the board for a decision. And can I invite Mrs. Ferguson to speak to this report, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this application is for the same nature of development, again, single bedroom properties, but contained within an arrangement of 2 to 3 buildings. Just by way of context, again, like within the village of Tarbert, on the bottom left quadrant of the screen is the pier marshalling area, which was under construction at the time of this aerial image. The care homes in the top left. The application that we've just dealt with is in the centre of the slide. You can see the houses at Sunny Hill pretty much dead centre in the slide. And then the application site is in the top right corner, indicated by the orange arrow. And it is again an area of common grazing land, and it sits behind some business units. Again, the road there is the road leaving Tarbert going to Scalpay. It's just it's a slightly more detailed image. Bottom left, you can see the houses in Sunny Hill again. And then there's a stretch of road where you've got like a couple of 2 or 3 detached houses. So there's one after you pass Sunny Hill, there's a house either side of the road there. Then one really close to the industrial units, which sits at a lower level. And then planning permission was also granted for another house on the area that you can see cleared to the south of the site where the business units are. And this site sits behind the business units. So the site is indicated by the kind of red line here, similar to the previous site in the sense that it is common grazing land. Again, it's a planning permission in principle, so there's fairly minimal information made available. The access comes in off the main road to Scalpay, and the intention is that the site would be serviced via the access that currently serves the business units. Now that access is a one-way access, so you come in one end and then you go out on the other, because the visibility is clear at the top, and any access or egress to the site would require to follow the same arrangement. So as I said, it's undeveloped land. It's on the easterly edge of Tarbert. It's behind the 3 workshop units that were developed about 10 years ago, and the access would be taken between 2 of the units. Again, in common with the rest of Harris, it's within the National Scenic Area. And this application is actually out with the mapped limits of Tarbert main settlement, but the front boundary line sits on the settlement line, so it shares its southern boundary with the main settlement. So it's therefore arguably on land that transitions into the rural settlement. The site has not been subject to any previous planning applications, but in 2012 planning permission was granted for the 3 workshop units that have now been constructed. So the actual application site itself, so it extends to 0.27 of a hectare, so it's just shy of 3/4 of an acre. The units that lie to the south are currently used, one as a restaurant, the middle one as a business office unit, and the one to the north, furthest to the east, as a brewery. All these current uses are compatible with residential development, but if residential development is granted on this site, it would preclude any future use of those units for industrial use, because that would not be compatible. The nearest residential dwelling is to the southwest of the site, and that's about 62 metres measured distance. The site again is predominantly hard rocky ground with numerous outcrops of rock, shallow pockets of peat and soil, and again raggrass and heather. The land is uneven and it begins to incline towards a ridge at the rear of the site. And again, ground conditions are challenging, but in this case possibly unlikely to be insurmountable, given that the development of the units has been on similar ground. Just a kind of like a quick reminder of proposed development. These 14 units within 2 to 3 buildings. Now the difference here is that this site is not serviced by the public sewage network, because it's out with the limits of I think the public sewer ends round about Sunnyhill, and therefore they would need to provide a private wastewater system, and that would need to be accommodated within the limits of the site. And again, just because it's a PPP application, there's fairly limited information. This view is looking across the site, so it's at basically, like, you can see the business units, the back of the business units there, and you're looking down towards Tarbert, and you can see Sunnyhill, the gables of the houses at Sunnyhill just in the distance there. So you can see, like, it's a kind of plateau, but with outcrops of rock. And then this is looking up the way across the site, and you can see the business units. So you're facing northeast in this image. And just in terms of the road here, so this is the road heading to Tarbert and Kilscalpy, heading to Kilscalpy and Scalpy itself. There is no footpath in this section of road. Once you've entered into the access to the business units, there is currently a hammerhead turning there, and the proposal would be that the access into the site would be taken at this point. Again, 11 representations received, and I'll just let members read through those. just move on to the planning issues. Similar to the previous case, there's a demonstrable need for housing in Tarbert and in Harris more generally. Again, challenges in identifying suitable land. Geology ground conditions here are maybe not as challenging as the previous application, but they nevertheless are challenging. It's acknowledged that this would be backland development, but it's concluded that overall it wouldn't compromise the settlement pattern of Tarbert, or indeed the surrounding rural context, and subject to planning controls wouldn't harm existing residential neighbour amenity. However, the site's not currently serviced by the public sewage network, and therefore a private wastewater treatment arrangement would be required. And further, there's no footpath beyond Sunny Hill. Main road here is 60 miles per hour, and roads colleagues advise that a means of safe pedestrian connectivity with Tarbert should be provided. The application is for planning permission in principle. As previous case, there would be a requirement if members went with the recommendation for approval that a further application would be required, providing the information that is set out there by way of condition. So the recommendations for approval, and I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Ferguson, for that report. Any questions or comments from members?
Yeah, Chair.
Yes, Councillor Finnegan, online.
Yeah, it was just to clear up a query that Morag had put in her presentation regarding if it's the units being used for industrial use, but they couldn't be used. I was a bit confused about what that meant in terms of if the application was approved for residential use, that the units couldn't be used in the future or something for industrial use, or is that further units if they were to be built in the area? I was just a bit confused. I just wanted to get a bit of clarification on that, please.
Elaborate, Mrs. Ferguson.
These units were built for let, so they're currently let by the owner to these various tenants. The use of the units wasn't restricted, so they could be class 4 business use, they could be class 5 industrial or class 6 storage. So there wasn't a restriction placed on them because of the time they were built. They weren't clear as to who the tenants might be. So class 5 is an industrial category which is generally not compatible with residential. So if you consent residential that close, it would mean that if a tenancy came forward in the future, if somebody moved out of one of those units, which over the lifetime is likely to happen, and somebody came forward with a, industrial use, that use could not be, would be in conflict with a residential use.
Oh, right. So then you couldn't use them in the future. You wouldn't be able to use them for industrial use.
No, if there was an application for such use, to date there hasn't. In our knowledge, there hasn't been an industrial use in any of them since they were built. But that's not to say that there couldn't be in the future. But beside a residential use, it would preclude that use.
And so, what would you define as industrial use? Because I mean, I know that at one time the candle factory were in there, and in the past in one of the units. So would that be classed as industrial or not?
It's probably a use that's compatible because it's not really like heavy industrial.
Okay.
So industrial is anything that would be, noisy, generate, manufacturing something
manufacturing
that would
or
be noisy,
mechanics.
Generate noise, smell, dust, that would be incompatible with a residential use.
Okay, right, okay. Thanks for that. Thanks, Morag.
Thank you, Paul. I have a brief question, Morag. I noticed within the application there's no allowance for a pedestrian footpath to Tarbert. And could you elaborate further on that?
The application doesn't include that provision, and it has come as a advice from roads. So Roads have advised that there should be some kind of form of pedestrian connectivity. They haven't specified that it must, they've said it should. There is, at the moment, anybody coming in, including from the private houses, would just walk along the edge of the road.
Okay. Vice Chair.
Actually, that's actually the point I was going to make. Although I'm not against this given permission, if permission were to be granted, I would like to see an extra recommendation that a pathway would be provided by the applicant, so that we don't end up in a position in years to come where the residents will want the council to make that provision. There is a provision already, as you pointed out, to Sunny Hill all the way into Tarbert. So I think I'd like the recommendation to be that the applicant would provide means of pedestrian access, and this would be delegated to the Chief Planning Officer to determine.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Is that a condition we could potentially add to the recommendation, Mrs. Ferguson?
Yes, Chair, that could just be added to the list of the matters specified in conditions. So to be an additional provision within the existing, within the conditions that are specified.
Would members of the board be happy to accept that extra condition to the application? Okay. Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much, Morag. I'd be of a mind to approve this, but and it's more an observation rather than a question, and certainly probably not to put Morag on the spot, but a 60-mile-an-hour limit there just makes me shudder a bit, That's a fast wee bit of road, and there's going to be potentially another 28 houses, from the previous application and this one, another 28 houses there or flats there. So a lot of potential for maybe putting that down to a 30-mile-an-hour, extending it to a 30 on the way out. But an observation, and I know it's not for this, but yeah, just thank you.
Thank you for that, George. Any other comments or questions from members of the board?
Yeah.
Councillor Finnegan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was just a bit of a concern now regarding that, because I don't know if the North Harris Trust were aware of that situation regarding the industrial units until Morag presented it, on the papers. I wasn't aware of it myself until only when I read the paper yesterday. And so I've just got a bit of a concern about that it's going to, in the future, restrict the use of those units for North Harris Trust as they are the landlord. And I'm just wondering how that can be dealt with. Because they haven't had they have had no say, and they've really had probably no time to comment on that.
That material to this report.
The report has been published, and they are they're the agent, so it would be really for them to have read the report and submitted any further comments or representations if they wish to do so. I mean, it is just that incompatibility of residential and industrial.
Yeah.
I mean, each case would be decided on its merits. So if somebody came forward with an industrial proposal, then it would be assessed at the time, but it's likely to raise so it's not absolute, but it's likely to restrict the use of the units.
Okay. You okay with that, Paul?
Yeah. I mean, I presume that if it went to full planning permission, that would have to be obviously one of the concerns that that whoever would have to be put in to make sure that was considered at the time. I think probably. But yeah, it's a bit of a concern, right?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Therefore, the recommendation before us is that planning be approved with the additional condition proposed by the Vice Chair for the applicant to provide means of pedestrian access delegated to Chief Planning Officer to determine. Happy with that, Clerk? Yep. Do members agree? Yeah. Yes. Thank you. And finally, our last item on today's agenda, item number 6 before you, which is planning permission for the erection of dwelling with associated access, drainage and services at number 3, Trumascarry, Clachan Sands, Isle of North Uist. This planning application has received more than 6 representations, which are considered by the appointed officer to be valid and raising material planning considerations. The application cannot be determined under delegation and is therefore presented to the board for a decision. And can I invite Mrs. Ferguson to speak to this report?
Thank you, Chair. So this is a detailed planning application for the erection of a dwelling at Clachan Sands, at Trumascarry, Clachan Sands in North Uist. And for those less familiar, I've just put on like a slide just to kind of indicate the location of Trumascarry. So it's on the north end of North Uist, and it's basically the first township that you come to when you turn off the North Uist circular heading on the road to Bernary. The Trumascarry itself is more akin to it is crofts, but it's more akin. It's operated more as a farm. The road is there's just the single, like the road just comes into the village. It is adopted as far as where the where the turning area is, just south of where the application site is. The application site itself is indicated by the red star there on the image. So just by way of context, the road on the right hand side heading north, that is the road heading towards Bernary, and the main road is the circular road round North Uist, and you can see what was the former quarry, now the seaweed manufacturing plant, just on the bottom right of the image there, and then on the bottom left, the village of Avor. I'm going to cover just like a few of the issues before I actually go to the actual detail of the application itself, just for the benefit of members, because it's not something that's, to my recollection, that the planning board have dealt with before. So the application site is in proximity to and considered to have an impact upon the setting of listed buildings. These are a category B listed former church, a category C former manse, and then they are listed together as a group. And it's also considered that there would be some impact upon the landscape character. It's a low-lying Maher landscape character type, and so the house would be dominant within that. This site has got planning permission, an extant planning permission for a house at the moment, and so the principle of constructing a house there is not in dispute. The planning permission was granted 2 years ago for a single-story dwelling house, which was, fairly modest. I think it was a 2-bedroom house. And the other kind of key issue that has been taken into consideration is the Scottish Government's declared housing crisis, and acknowledged that there's locally a shortage of affordable housing. So just some other kind of key issues of which members will be aware: that the Comhairle is required to determine its planning applications in accordance with the provisions of the development plan. The development plan is comprised now of both the Comhairle's own Outer Hebrides local plan and National Planning Framework 4, and the grounds for going against the development plan would be if there were material planning considerations that outweighed the plan. It's also the case that the Comhairle has a legal duty under the Planning List of Buildings and Conservation Scotland Act to have special regard to the desirability of preserving a listed building and its setting, or any features of special architectural or historic interest which it possesses. And that legal duty is reflected in both national policy, but it's also reflected in our own local planning policy. And in order to carry out an assessment, the importance of the listed buildings and their setting would require to be properly understood, and then the impacts assessed as part of the consideration of the application. So just briefly, just covering what is a listed building category, what do they actually mean? So a category B building is a building of regional importance, or major examples of a particular period, style, or building type. A category C is of local importance, or maybe one that has been, altered from when it was originally constructed. And you can also get category C buildings, which grouped with another building of more importance can be categorized as B. And in this case, because it is a manse and a church, they are categorized collectively as a category B. And then just in terms of legislation, the listed building and planning legislation, it applies to all listed buildings regardless of what the category of listing is. I'm just going to let members read through this slide, which just explains the setting of a listed building, what that actually means. And I'll maybe just comment briefly on that last paragraph, just cumulative change. So in this case, these listed buildings have already had development round about them that has, had some impact on the setting. I'll come to that later on in the presentation. But cumulative change is basically like the sort of gradual increase in development that then could ultimately detract from their, from their long-term future. So just some other points that in relation to listing, status afforded to a listed building is not diminished by its condition. The former church, it's roofless, but the building has stood for almost 200 years. And you cannot dismiss the potential for it to be subject to future conservation and restoration. Former manse already been modified over the years. There's been a recent change of ownership and it's currently in the process of being renovated. We've dealt with a number of listed building applications in relation to that property. I think that setting was, I think that's been copied in from, it's obviously slurry place. So again, just like in terms of key issues, before we go on to the detail of the application, there were 6 representations submitted. They were all in support. They've been detailed in the report, and these contain both material and non-material matters. For the benefit of the board, the agent and all the representation cite the status of the applicant, their personal contribution to the local demographic and the community as important factors. And while, we understand those endorsements, they're not material planning considerations and we can't take them into account. The board can't take those into account in arriving at its decision. It's the case that planning permission, it's not personal, pertains to land. The land is tradable and ownership in personal circumstances can change. Okay, just coming to the actual application site itself. So this is just a kind of aerial. So the kind of whole of the kind of Trimshkari, although like it is actually broken into crofts, it's kind of operated as a farming, largely as a farming unit. So the road comes in from the the road that branches off to Bernardy. So you can see, like, just left of centre in the image, to the south, you can see a walled garden. The manse is the white building, and you can see the outline of the church to the north of the manse. Then outlined in red with the access route is the application site. To the east of the manse, you can see a croft house that's probably about 40 years old. It's a single story croft house, and there are some other outbuildings. And then on the far left, there is the original Trimsbury farmhouse and a number of the kind of agricultural buildings that are used to operate the unit at the moment. Also, just you can see like an area of cleared ground just again north of the bottom quadrant there, and that is a consent that was granted in around about 2021, I think, for a small chalet. It's a turf roofed chalet. It was granted a 10-year consent for a holiday let. So just to kind of give like a bit more context of what I'll cover in a bit more detail. On the bottom left is a photograph of the church, which is current. So it's a former parliamentary church built under an act of parliament and under the kind of supervision of Thomas Telford, who was the chief engineer of roads and bridges in Scotland at the time. And then the proposed house for development, an image in the top right there for construction on the site, which is outlined to the north. So I'll just kind of take you through the site context. So the application site is 0.13 of a hectare, so it's just over quarter of an acre, but that includes the access. The landscape character is Comhairle landscape. It's gently sloping grassland, and the proposed housing site is on the lower edge of a rocky outcrop. And it would have been formerly part of the glebe land for the church. Because of the nature of the land, there's expansive views from the application site in most directions, and the land eventually falls to the shoreline, and there are dispersed pockets of building both in Clachansands and in Trimsbury itself. The sites within the setting of two listed buildings, as mentioned, is a Category B former church, a Category C former manse, and then they're also listed as a group under Category B. And there is a single-storey dwelling, a modern croft house to the east. It has a domestic scale turbine. It's got some various outbuildings, and then to the southwest there is a modest timber holiday chalet. So this just tells you a little bit more about the Category B church. The plaque there is the plaque on the gate. It was one of 32 churches built in the Highlands and Islands. There were 4 built in the Outer Hebrides, one in Knock in Point, which was demolished, one in Cross and Ness. The manse remains and the wall remains, but the church itself was demolished. One in Bernardy, which was renovated about 10 years ago into a dwelling house, and the one at Trimsbury, which is the one furthest south. They were built in around about 1828, so they're just coming up for 200 years old. So again, these are current photographs just taken last week. The church, that's the principal elevation. So each of these churches were all of the same plan. They had 2 large windows and 2 doors on the front elevation. The rear elevation, top right, there were no openings in that at all. Then a couple of images taken internally because it's easier to see the actual architecture from the inside looking out. So the one on the bottom left is an image looking through what is the front elevation, and the image on the bottom right is the looking through the gable end facing north. So the application for the proposed development, it proposes a 1.5-storey dwelling. The walls would be clad with dark stained larch cladding, and there'll be a turf roof. It's kind of the design statement identifies it as a kind of Faroese style. 2 floors of living accommodation, and then northern and western elevations would have large modern windows to capitalise on the views, and the southern and eastern elevations would have smaller white windows which would contrast with the dark cladding. So this is just like the site plan that was submitted by the agent. So you can see the access to the site would come off the Hammerhead turning just where the former church and church wall is located. It would run for a short distance and then onto the actual site. You can see from the contours there that the site is sloping. So it would be on the kind of lower edge of that kind of rocky knoll. And the proposal is from the cross section, which you can see at the top of the slide, is that they would basically, dig down so that the house would sit into the ground in order to reduce the height of the house and reduce its competition with the listed church. So the cross section at the top there indicates that, subject to the land being dug out and the house being sitting into the cutting, that they would achieve a 4-metre level height difference between the peak of the church and the bridge of the house. So these are just like the elevations of the proposed house. You can see on the left hand side there where the house would basically, there would be a kind of, the site would be dug in and there would be a kind of retaining wall built where the house would sit below the retaining wall. These are cross sections that just indicate the interior of the house. And just look a bit of like background to the application, which has taken some time to determine. So prior to the application coming in, it was subject to pre-application advice, and at that time the agent was advised that there was likely to be an impact on the setting of the listed buildings, but the pre-application advice wasn't accepted and the application came in as it had originally been proposed. The application was submitted along with visualisations and latterly a heritage impact assessment, but the heritage impact assessment did not adequately address the significance of the listed buildings, either individually or as a group, and nor did it carry out an objective assessment of the harm to their setting. And what's required to be done is for that assessment to be able to conclude whether the development would make a positive or a negative contribution to the significance of the assets, and also whether it would affect the ability to appreciate that significance, and also the implications for cumulative effect. The fact that it's something further that is going to be built in relation to the setting. So following receipt of the application, there were further efforts made to encourage reconsideration of the design to reduce the massing height and the external materials. But these negotiations were unsuccessful, and therefore the application fell to be assessed as submitted. Was within the ability of the planning service to refuse the application on the basis that the heritage impact assessment was insufficient, but instead we carried out that assessment ourselves by reference to the publicly available resources on the parliamentary church and the former manse. So I'll just take you through some images now. This image is taken from the road, as you pass the road that turns off to Bernery and you're heading towards Solace. So you're on the main A865, which is a circular road round North Uist. And this is a fairly accurate image of the distance at which you would see the house. And I want to stress that because the next couple of images are zoomed were ones that were submitted by the applicant, but we've zoomed them in order to explain the principles. So I think what's useful to see here is that you can see the farmhouse buildings low by the shore on the left of the slide. You can see the manse, the white building on the wall. You can see the outline of the church, albeit because it's stone, it's kind of fairly recessive in the landscape. And at the moment, there is a blue container, that's a shipping container, which is being used by the contractor that's working on the manse. And then to the right-hand side of the manse and former church, you can see the croft house that was built about 40 years ago. It's a modern single-storey croft house and the other buildings. And then way beyond that, the land falls away to the Machar and to the shore. So as I say, like, this is like a zoomed-in image, and it's taken from the applicant's design statement. And what they were looking to illustrate was the difference between the house being in dark stained timber and being left to naturally weather. But what it does also show is that the position of the house means that it is closing in on the setting of the listed building. And so while it does not appear to be an awful lot higher than the single-storey dwelling to the east, there is, from that key viewpoint looking across, it would, appear closer. But it's also acknowledged that to the left of the manse, there is this chalet with a turf roof, which I don't think's in that. I'm not sure if it's in the image or not, but it sits to the left of the manse in the image. So I'll flick back and forward between this image and the next one. So that's with the dark timber, turf roof, and that's with the light timber. And, so that's unstained. That would be the timber left to naturally weather to grey silver. So, that's the only difference between these. And as I stress, that is like a zoomed image. It's not how you would see it with the naked eye. So then there were a series of visualizations submitted, and as I said, these weren't used within the heritage impact assessment in order to carry out any kind of impact on the setting. So again, like, these just show the, I haven't put in the kind of blank ones, the pre-development ones, but to the just top of the bottom quadrant, so almost dead center, this is the image of the proposed house with the dark timber, and again, just right of center with the non-stained timber. It's taken from Clachan Sands Road, which is a minor village road, looking over the distance across the sand. Then this is taken slightly further in the same. It's actually taken on. I think this one's taken on the main road. You can see the proposal for the new house, and you can see again, because of its dark timber cladding and the roof, the massing of it would compete with the former church. This is the same visualization, but this time with shown in natural timber. And then that is just another visualization that's taken from the design statement that showed the proposed house, the access road, and that's looking north towards across the sand to Clachan Sands village. So there were 6 representations from 11 people. They were all in support, and they expressed views that were both material and non-material. So amongst those that were material is that the development would meet an essential housing need where there was a shortage of affordable housing, that housing developments are essential to sustaining a population. There was a view expressed by some that the design was complementary to the landscape and its surroundings. The reviews expressed that the development would have no negative impact on the listed buildings or the cultural or historic significance of the area, and also views that it would not impact on the people's appreciation of the significance of the church and its surroundings. And then, as mentioned at the start, there were also views expressed that are non-material to planning in relation to the application and their contribution to the community. So, in conclusion, the planning assessment found both harm and modest benefits. There is harm. It's assessed that there will be harm to the setting of the listed buildings. But it is also acknowledged that there is already some harm to the setting of these heritage assets. So there is a kind of cumulative element to this. At the end of the day, we concluded that the extent of the additional harm was going to be relatively limited. On the positives, the fact that it would add one house to the local housing stock, and while that's a very modest contribution, it's nevertheless a positive contribution. And we've given that matter significant weight due to the Scottish Government's declared housing crisis. These competing factors were then weighed in a planning balance, and the assessment and the recent conclusions were set out in the report. And it requires to be acknowledged that the weighting is finely balanced, and different weight could be applied by the planning board as the ultimate decision maker. The report recommendation is for approval, and I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Morag, for that very extensive report. I would like to open this out to members of the board for any questions or comments. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Chair, and Morag, thank you for that extensive presentation. I'm very minded to support this for a number of reasons which Morag has gone through. It's well supported community-wise. The applicant has tried to meet the heritage side of it as well by going down and having turf roofs, etc. And yes, we are in a housing crisis situation, so I'm very minded to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. Councillor McNeill.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, Morag, and in-depth presentation. I'm also minded to support and very favourable. Just for my own information, do you know what the floor area of the new house is compared to the church? And
I don't off the top of my head, but they are fairly similar in terms of plan, in terms of
they look very similar, don't they?
Footprint.
Yeah,
so
yeah. That's what I meant. Okay, that's fine. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Vice Chair.
Like the other two, I am minded to support this. I think it's a wonderful development, actually. I was especially impressed with the sheep. I saw one of the photos. And the thought of having grass in the house would be handy as well.
For the recommend, Councillor MacLeod.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, I meant to ask a question just from my own knowledge of Morag. All the representations for this was positive. If they hadn't made these representations, would the decision have been taken by planners anyway, yeah?
If there weren't representations, the decision could have been made under delegation, but given that it has been a fairly protracted discussion over the application from pre-application to the stage, to the point at which we were able to determine it, it would probably have been brought to the board as a sensitive application because of the issue to do with the significance of the listed buildings. So we would probably have elected to bring it to the board regardless of the representations.
Okay. For that? Yep. Therefore, members of the board, the recommendation before you is that planning be approved. Members agree? Thank you for that. That brings me to the conclusion of this morning's meeting. Can I thank you all for your attendance and contributions and wish you all a pleasant onward week. Thank you.